Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome here to the launch pad and our live launch coverage of OneWeb 17 launching from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. If it's your first time here, welcome. My name's Zach. I'm the founder and host here at the launch pad, and we're glad to have you joining us here today. Here at TLP, it's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow because we believe that space is better together, and we're glad to have you joining us here. And right off the bat, Corporal Day Walker, thank you so much for gifting those 20 memberships. Thank you guys for supporting what we do. It's a busy year in space, and we are excited to bring you the best possible coverage of everything space. As you can see, SpaceX is getting set up here to begin their live coverage of launching a bunch of OneWeb satellites on a Falcon 9 rocket. It sounds a little weird, a competitor launch, rocket company launching a competitor's product, but as SpaceX says, that's not their deal. They can launch for anybody. They have customers that are competitors and non-competitors, and they're just giving options of people going to space. We're going to listen into Mission Control here for an update on the rocket as we count down now 13 minutes, 18 seconds, and counting until launch. As always, you can send in those questions in the chat by tagging us at the launch pad, and we'll work on answering those live throughout today's stream. Deployment going to take just over an hour and a half today, with OneWeb deploying them in sets of 2 and 3 over the course of about 40 minutes, and we'll be staying live through all of that. So stay with us. After launch, we'll be answering your questions through the coast phase, and then we'll be following along through deployment. If you haven't yet, though, take a moment, engage that like button, and share out the stream, invite others to join us. And if you're new, hit the subscribe button so you never miss another live launch coverage, docking, undocking, or return to Earth. We're tracking Crew 5. Let's listen into SpaceX Mission Control as we count down to launch of OneWeb 17 from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station.
Your screen is a live view of Falcon 9 awaiting its 2:13 p.m. Eastern Time launch from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral in Florida. Today's launch is for our customer OneWeb, a connectivity wholesaler that delivers high-speed, low-latency connectivity solutions to telecommunications companies, internet service providers, local governments, businesses, and communities everywhere. Hello, everyone. My name is Yome Zo, and I'm a propulsion engineer here at SpaceX. Thanks for joining the OneWeb Launch 17 mission, which marks our 215th overall mission to date. As the mission name suggests, this is OneWeb's 17th overall launch and third with SpaceX. Similar to our previous launches with OneWeb, today's launch will also send 40 OneWeb satellites into low Earth orbit, bringing their LEO constellation to 582 satellites in orbit. Today, we will deploy OneWeb satellites in 3 different deployment sequences. And as a note, if we lose ground station coverage during parts of any deployment sequence, we will confirm deployment of satellites that were scheduled to deploy once we gain connection at a different ground station. If you're interested in reviewing the full deployment sequence, check out spacex.com. And here at just under T-minus 12 minutes, the weather, range, and vehicle are all go for launch. If for some reason we do not launch today, we do have a backup opportunity on Friday, March 10th at 2:08 p.m. Eastern Time. And with that, let's learn a little bit more about OneWeb and today's mission.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. We are at T-minus 11 minutes, 20 seconds, and counting. Falcon 9 is well into propellant load ahead of its launch from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. They're playing through a little bit of a video here explaining about OneWeb as their customer. OneWeb, a alternative to the Starlink internet constellation. Difference with OneWeb is they deploy their satellites at a much higher altitude, so they need a lot fewer satellites. OneWeb is becoming globally available, expecting to be full global available later this year with their first generation of their satellites. They just started to open contracts during they are being purchased out by another company, and that company is preparing for the second generation of the OneWeb constellation, set to begin launching in 2025-2026. Again, if you guys have questions, you can send those in the chat by tagging us at the launch pad, and we'll work on answering those live. We've been keeping an eye on the weather, of course. It's Florida, so that's something we're always keeping an eye on for launches. And right now, everything is looking nominal for today's launch. We'll bring it up here on the screen very briefly for a moment, but right now, winds are looking good. There's no lightning. Clouds are looking good as well. This is live view from the KSC weather station. So I'll click through a couple of the radars here. You can see the wind conditions over on the Space Coast. Everything looking well as we continue towards liftoff now, just under 10 minutes from now. If it's your first time here, though, welcome. Make sure you take a moment, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another Launch Live. And also consider subscribing to our new The Launchpad News channel. That's where our new weekly news show, news updates, and exclusive one-on-one interviews will be coming out. And we're excited to do that. And if you're a TLP member, keep an eye out. We're going to start rolling out some members-only videos in the coming weeks with some of the activities that we're doing. So keep an eye out for those videos as well. Great to see so many of you tuning in from all over the world. I know we got Florida, we've got UK, we got Vero Beach. I just saw another one in here, Cornwall, England. Great to see you. Take a moment, let us know in the chat where you're watching from, and we'll possibly do some more shout outs there while we answer some of the questions. Amna is asking how many more satellites still need to be launched by OneWeb. If I'm correct, this is their last launch aboard Falcon 9, and I believe they have one, if not two, launches with the ISRO that is scheduled to be occurring as well. So they're getting very close to completing their first round. They had been, of course, launching on Soyuz crafts prior to the Ukraine invasion, but with that and sanctions being in place, that vehicle was no longer available. So they had to turn to others, and they turned to SpaceX's Falcon 9 and the ISRO's launch vehicle as well. So they're working through that, looking to their future. They apparently have plans on launching on, it looked like New Glenn. I believe there was Firefly or Relativity was in there as well, possibly Falcon 9. So they were looking at a variety. There was 4 or 5 rockets that they were currently working with contracts with. As we come down to T-minus 8 minutes, let's listen back into SpaceX Mission Control maybe for an update. Nope, they're playing another video. We'll listen into them once they get another update on the actual rocket. Coming up next is going to be engine chill. This is where they will begin chilling the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket ahead of launch. During flight, you'll hear engine chill of the MVAC engine. Let's listen back in.
Federa, and I'm a propulsion engineer here at SpaceX, and I'm excited to join Yome to bring you live coverage for today's launch. On your screen is a live view of our Falcon 9 vehicle. Falcon 9 is a 2-stage rocket which stands 230 feet or 70 meters tall, which is roughly 20 meters taller than the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, France, which is about 40 meters tall. When it's fully fueled, the Falcon 9 will hold just over 1 million pounds of propellant that the vehicle will mostly burn through in less than 3 minutes after liftoff. And we began loading those propellants on both stages of the vehicle at just about T-minus 35 minutes.
Engine chill has started.
Good call out there for the engine chill on M1D's beginning. Now, starting from the top of our rocket, we have our payload fairing, which safely encloses the 17-foot diameter fairing, which is the structure at the very top of the rocket. Now, this structure protects the satellites from aerodynamic heating, loads, and contamination during ascent. And once we reach the vacuum of space, we will actually jettison these fairing halves while the second stage continues to its final destination in low Earth orbit. And just below that payload fairing, we have the second stage. That's the stage that will take the 40 OneWeb satellites to a low Earth orbit today. That second stage will ignite its single Merlin vacuum, or MVAC engine, at about 2.5 minutes into flight, and then it will relight for a second time.
Stage 1, RP1 load is complete.
Good call out there. We just finished loading RP1 on the first stage. Below that second stage, we have the interstage, which is actually part of the first stage. And as you can see on your screen, the carbon fiber interstage is a distinct black color because it is unpainted TPS, or thermal protection system. Now, this protects the composite material that the interstage is made out of. At the very bottom of the first stage, there are 9 Merlin 1D engines that will get Falcon 9 off the ground and up into the thinner parts of the Earth's atmosphere. And shortly after liftoff, the first and second stages will physically separate from one another, and then the second stage will continue to orbit, while the first stage will start making its way back down to Earth. The first stage is designed to be reflown multiple times with minimal refurbishment between flights. And today's first stage will actually be flying for the 13th time, and will be attempting to land at landing zone 1, which is not too far from the launch pad. On your screen right now is a live view of that landing zone. And if we are successful in recovering the booster today, it will mark the 177th successful recovery of an orbital class rocket. And lastly, that
Falcon 9
large
tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
That large truss structure you see there is the transporter erector, or TE. We use it to roll the rocket out to the pad and raise it to its vertical launch position. Now, the TE also routes the vehicle's fluids, power, and telemetry umbilicals from the ground systems to the rocket and the satellites, and this is until Falcon 9 goes on internal power and clears the pad. At liftoff,
Strong back retract has started.
good call out there, we are beginning to retract that strong back, and we do move it away to clear the way for Falcon 9's ascent.
And while we're waiting for TE retraction, we'll see the clamp arms just below the fairing halves. You can see them starting to open right now. And following the clamp arms opening, the TE will begin to pull away from the rocket slightly. And then at T0, the ground hydraulic systems will pull the TE even further away from Falcon 9 as it lifts off. You can see those clamp arms opening there just below the fairing. Now the first stage is connected to a launch mount at the base of the transporter erector, but the structure is hinged, so it will retract away from the vehicle in preparation for launch. You heard that call out earlier for the strong back retraction sequence beginning, but here in just a few seconds you should see that strong back begin to actually recline away from Falcon 9. We are waiting for TE retraction, and it's a beautiful day in Cape Canaveral, Florida.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
Now at this point in the countdown, you just
And
heard
stage 1 POGO.
you heard the call out that stage 1 LOX load is complete, and stage 2 LOX loading should finish up just about a minute later at T-minus 2 minutes. At which point both the first and second stages will be fully loaded with about 1 million pounds of kerosene and liquid oxygen. Now those white clouds that you see forming around the Falcon are expected. We do begin to vent the chilled gas above the LOX tank liquid surface to maintain the pressures that we need. And you can see around the first and second stages that as we load that super chilled liquid oxygen, it is causing condensation and clouds to form in the humid Florida air. Second stage LOX loading should be completing here shortly. And at T-minus 60 seconds.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
There is that call out for stage 2 LOX loading complete. And at T-minus 60 seconds, Falcon 9 will be in startup. So this means the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers will take over the launch countdown. And just inside of T-minus 2 seconds, we light the Merlin 1D engines
Launch gas and close that.
for liftoff. The OneWeb Launch 17 payload continues to be healthy, and the Falcon 9 team is tracking no issues on the rocket. Weather is looking green, and the range is ready to support today's launch. We do have a backup opportunity tomorrow, March 10th at 2:08 p.m., but we are proceeding into the final minute of terminal count.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
LD, go for launch.
We have that final go for launch. All systems are go for launch on Falcon 9 with the OneWeb Launch 17 mission payload.
T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Just full power. And liftoff, OneWeb 3.
Vehicles pitching downrange.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
Nominal power and telemetry.
Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral, carrying the
Vehicle is
OneWeb
supersonic.
Launch 17 payload. Now we're still going up, but we're also heading horizontally away from the launch pad. And coming up in just a few seconds here, we will be approaching the point of max Q. There we go, call out for that there. At the point of max Q, we throttle the Merlin 1D engines down briefly to reduce the loads on the vehicle. We've now throttled the engines back up to full power, and this will help us continue to accelerate towards low Earth orbit. The rocket typically needs to go about 17,500 miles per hour.
MVAC engine chill has started.
Good call out there for MVAC engine chill. We need to go about 17,500 miles per hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth and actually get into orbit. So keep an eye on that stage 1 telemetry at the bottom of your screen. Now coming up, we're going to have 5 events in very quick succession. Those are main engine cutoff, or MECO, stage separation, stage 1 flip, second engine start 1, boost back burn, and then from there, the fairing halves will separate. So keep an eye out for those events. Again, starting with main engine cutoff, coming up on that point in just about 15 seconds here, so let's listen in for that.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
Stage 1 boost back startup.
And there you go. You just heard and saw main engine cutoff, stage separation, stage 1 flip, and second engine start 1. Now we are in the middle of the boost back burn, which you can see on the left side of your screen there. That first stage has flipped around and is burning 3 of its Merlin 1D engines to head back towards the launch site, while the MVAC on the right is pushing the second stage into low Earth orbit. Now today's mission is what we call a RTLS, or return to launch site. And that's actually where we return the first stage back to a landing pad that is actually very close to where we took off from. Now this burn should last about 50 seconds, so we have about 10 seconds left in the boost back burn. Both stages continue to look nominal.
Stage 1 boost back shutdown.
And there we go, just had confirmation of successful boost back burn shutdown. Coming up next in just a few seconds, we will separate those fairing halves and should get a good view of our payload.
Bearing separation confirmed.
There we go, just had successful confirmation of boost back burn end and the successful separation of both the fairing halves from the second stage. Now both of these halves on today's mission are flying for the 6th time, and we will be attempting to retrieve them again today once they fall back to Earth using our recovery vessel, Bob.
We're just about at T plus a little over 4 minutes into today's mission, and we are in the first of 2 planned MVAC burns before satellite deployment. Now at T plus 6 minutes and 10 seconds, so a couple minutes from now, you should see on your screen the first stage's
Both vehicles
entry.
are following nominal trajectories.
You heard that both vehicles are on nominal trajectories. Great views from the first and second stages there. Now for the entry burn of the first stage, we do relight 3 of the M1D engines on the first stage, starting with the center E9 engine, followed shortly by the E1 and E5 engines, which are all in a row. And this slows the vehicle down as it passes into the Earth's atmosphere. Now we do the entry burn in order to slow down to reduce re-entry forces, which helps us to recover and reuse our first stage. During that entry burn, Falcon 9 is decelerating, firing those 3 Merlin engines, but we're still moving really rapidly, so the vehicle will actually fly through its own plume and deposit some of that carbon-based fuel soot that Falcon 9 uses onto the booster. And great views of those grid fins on the first stage. Again, the Falcon 9 first stage that is supporting today's mission will perform this entry burn for the 13th time, having previously supported multiple missions, including GPS vehicles 4 and 5, Inspiration 4, Axiom 1, Nalsat 301, and 7 separate Starlink missions. Entry burn starting here shortly.
Stage 1 entry burn, startup.
There is the start of the entry burn.
Stage 1 entry burn, shutdown.
Good entry burn from the first stage.
Stage 1 FTS is safed.
The flight termination system is safe for stage 1. You can see those attitude control thrusters on the first stage firing there.
Both vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
Both first and second stages are looking good. And our next milestone is the stage 1 landing burn, which is coming all the way back to landing zone 1 in Cape Canaveral, starting in about 15 seconds here.
Stage 1 transonic.
Stage 2 FTS is safed.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Start of our stage 1 landing burn. That's great drone footage of the first stage that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. Incredible views from first stage coming down on
Stage
landing
1
zone
land and
1.
let deploy.
That was a beautiful landing.
Stage 1 land at the press.
Beautiful landing of the first stage, and there you have it. That landing marks
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
That landing marks SpaceX's 177th recovery of an orbital class rocket, including the first stage landings of Falcon 9 and Heavy. And now back to stage 2. Stage 2 is looking good with just about 10 seconds left before second engine cutoff 1.
MVAC shutdown.
Heard that call out for MVAC shutdown. We're just waiting on confirmation of a good orbit.
Nominal orbit insertion.
You just heard that good call out for nominal orbital insertion. But the mission isn't over yet. The second stage is now embarking on its first coast phase. Now, after this coast phase, we will relight that MVAC engine for a second time around the T plus 55-minute mark. So we'll see you back here in about 45 minutes.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. 9 minutes, 27 seconds ago, a Falcon 9 rocket launched from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. It has successfully deployed its second stage with the OneWeb satellites into orbit, and we are now counting down just over 48 minutes until deployment sequence of those OneWeb satellites will begin. Now that sequence is going to take about 30 minutes in total, and we'll be staying live through all of that, and we'll actually have some live views of deployment. So we hope that you'll stay with us. We're going to be answering your guys' comments and questions through this coast phase, so you can send those in the chat by tagging us at the launch pad, and we'll work on answering those. But if it was your first time here, welcome. My name's Zach. I'm the founder and host here at TLP. Here at TLP, it's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow, because we believe that space is better together, and we invite you to engage that subscribe button so you never miss another live launch coverage, docking, undocking, or return to Earth. We've got Crew 5 coming home in the next couple of days, so we hope you will join us live for that. Also, just a scheduling note for you all, in about half an hour, while we are still live and doing our commentated coverage of OneWeb, we will be covering also the state of NASA. That is an address with Administrator Bill Nelson. So you'll have two streams to be able to watch if you want to hear more about the future of NASA as we prepare for the president's budget to be dropped on Monday. So a very important time for NASA, finding out what its next budget will be. So we hope you'll join us for that as well. I want to big shout out to people donating today. Thank you so much for supporting us, Darmok. We really do appreciate it. Corporal Day Walker as well. Some super chats. Dakota, appreciate you guys all supporting what we do about bringing you best possible coverage of everything space. So keep sending in those questions by tagging us at the launch pad, and we'll work on answering those live over the next bit of the coast phase. And we will be answering those. Just make sure you're doing that tag so we can see them, because sometimes the chat gets absolutely crazy. But another fantastic launch there. And landing, a return to landing site seeming to become more and more common these days. But if you had not seen, we did put out an article just a couple of days. The Cape Canaveral launch pads are being reallocated, some of them. Part of a new launch pad allocation strategy. We'll drop the link in the chat so you guys can see that article. But the home, Slick 13, I believe it is, the home of landing zone 1 and 2, has been reallocated. It's unclear what will happen with SpaceX's landing sites at this point. We've put in for some information, but hoping that we will hear more on that. But Stoke Space, Phantom Space, Valle Space, or Vaya Space, and there's a fourth one, and I'm blanking on their name. ABL Space will now be coming to the Space Coast. 4 companies over the 3 different launch complexes. Really excited to see Stoke Space taking over Slick 14. That was previously home to NASA's Atlas and Mercury Atlas launches, and was home to all 4 crewed Mercury Atlas flights. So it's been in retirement for quite a while, but the Space Coast really becoming a commercial spaceport and bringing in this new era of space exploration. We're excited to see that happen. Beanman is asking, how does the second stage get recovered, or do they just crash it into the ocean? So the second stage of a Falcon 9 isn't recoverable. It is something that they do a planned deorbit burn. So just like when they launch, there's safety zones that you can't go into in the ocean under the path of the rocket, as well as where the rocket will be landing. Same thing. So they do a planned deorbit burn, and then that second stage re-enters in a designated area, generally around the air, off the coast of Australia. It's a safe area that ships are not available to be in, so they know that there's no risk of damage. And then there's just pile of second stages at the bottom of the ocean. So if you want a Falcon 9 second stage, you can go get a big ship and recover it from the bottom of the ocean, and it's yours. Jeff Bezos did that with one of the F1 engines from Saturn. So, you know, do you want to do that? They're there waiting for you. But they big thing for SpaceX. They don't want to leave garbage in space. There's only been a few second stages they've ever left in orbit in the last few years. They had one didn't do a successful deorbit burn, so it came down a few days later than planned. But even in the orbit that they're in, they decay quite quickly because they want to make sure that there is no extra space debris up in low Earth orbit. It's a busy enough place as it is. Daniel, was an awesome launch and landing. Yeah, absolutely. It was a great view. Today looked like some beautiful weather as well. Billy Bob was asking, will you have a stream for Long March later today? No, that is an unknown payload for the Chinese, so we will not have a live feed for that. China's very strict on when they have camera views. General rule of thumb for Chinese streams will be if it's a crew or cargo mission up to their space station, we'll be able to have a stream. Other than that, we generally will be able to get footage of the launch from the Chinese government following launch, and we generally try to post that as a short. So you can still see the launch, but isn't actually a full live launch coverage. Some of these are military payloads for the Chinese, so they don't live stream those either as well. But hopefully one day we'll be able to bring you live coverage of some more of the Long March launches, because there are a lot of them. Checking in here. San asking about the second stage, answered that one there. Bit about recovery as well with the new Starlinks, with the V2. They're actually helping mitigate more debris in space, because when you look at the Starlinks and how they deploy, they have that kind of claw that holds them down, those rods that release, and that's what lets them out. Well, that rod used to release and float away, and they've now got new tension rods that are helping mitigate that debris as well. So they're not just releasing it off anymore and causing extra garbage to be floating around. You can see actually a video of that from the first launch a few days ago here on the channel. Maybe one of our mods can grab a link for that and drop it in the chat there. If you guys have questions, you can keep sending those in the chat. Take us at the launch pad. We're waiting payload deployment about 42 minutes from now. Mark, China has a space station? That's news to me. Yeah, so they have the Tiangong space station. It has 3 modules on it, and they are actually beginning their planning process for their expansion. Originally, their plan was actually just to double what they did, build the same 3 modules again, but it looks like they've changed that, and they're going to add 1 larger module and then a new docking port. And that docking port will actually allow them to dock 4 to 6 vehicles to it. So they are working to expand their space station and their presence in low Earth orbit. But a lot smaller compared to the ISS, but as it grows, it's definitely getting there, and the ISS is only going to be around till the end of the decade. So at the current rate, there is the Chinese might have the larger station until we see Axiom and them start developing here in the next couple of years. They'll start launching their modules. And same with the orbital reef. So we're going to see a lot of changes about what space stations look like in low Earth orbit and in lunar orbit over the next, before the end of the decade. Bean Man, how does the Starship booster engine land? Well, the booster lands, well, I'm wondering if you can call it land. The booster gets caught out of the air is the long run plan. So the booster will, this isn't the booster, but use your imagination. The booster comes in, and there's the tower and has the claw. So the booster will come in, and it gets hooked by the chopsticks on the grid fins just below them, and then it'll get lowered down to the ground. But it'll be firing its engines to help slow it down and come in and control it in, and then it gets grabbed. So will be interesting to see if we see this happen this year. Elon at one point said, we'll try it on the first attempt. We'll see if that actually happens. But that is the current plans for that. If they aren't going to recover it, then it'll splash down into the Gulf of Mexico. That's the other strategy for it, and then it won't be recovered at that point. Athena's asking, what will happen to everything on board the ISS when it's decommissioned? That's a really great question that we don't have a full strategy for. We know almost all the countries at this point have signed on for the extension till 2030, including Russia. They will be operating the ISS till 2030. Then there's about an 18-month shutdown kind of plan, roughly, that they're doing. And in that time, they will use crew and cargo crafts to bring stuff home, bring science, equipment, research. But a large portion of the space station will just be burnt up in the atmosphere and discarded. It'll come down at Point Nemo, which is the furthest point from any landmass. That's where a number of other space stations have been deposited for it. And what they'll do is they will do a number of controlled burns of the ISS's thrusters and vehicles on board. They look like they were considering using Cygnus, but we're not sure if we'll still have Cygnus. So they're looking at options on which vehicle will be able to do the actual deorbit burn and just slow the whole station down so it comes right in at Point Nemo. And then it all burns up and unfortunately will sit at the bottom of the ocean. It'll be sad to see it go after such an incredible history and really a first major milestone in permanent space exploration, but it's coming to the end of its life. It technically has already passed its best before date, and they keep extending it. So it was the mid-2010s that it was originally expected to be retired. So we're getting about 15 extra years on board the ISS. But it's getting old. It's getting well past its due date for, human safe conditions. Seals are getting old and things, and there's so much maintenance they can do, but it gets to a point that at one point it does have to be retired. Darmok's asking, are those shorts on TLP clips? I believe right now they're here on this channel, but we are working on putting those onto clips as well. We're working on moving stuff over slowly. But you can see those, I believe, on here as well. Not every China mission we get a video feed, but if we do get one, we do try to post that for you guys. And we try to link it also in the Discord. If you guys haven't yet, though, you can take a moment, consider joining us on the TLP Discord. It's free to join. That's where our space community hangs out. Sometimes does launch watch parties together. And we'd be glad to have you there. If you're a TLP member, you can get some behind-the-scenes access, early video access, and things like that coming up in the near future. If you're just joining us, though, about 20 minutes ago, a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket launched from Florida, and we're now awaiting the beginning of about a 30 to 35-minute payload deployment sequence of OneWeb satellites, a competitor to Starlink. You can see in the bottom right corner, the second stage right now. We probably don't have a ground station at the current time. I haven't seen an update here in a second, but currently traveling 28,449 kilometers an hour, roughly, at about 181 kilometers in altitude. We do have one more burn of that second stage MVAC engine. That burn expected to take place at T plus 55 minutes. It's going to be a quick 3-second burn. And then about 3-4 minutes later, that's when we expect payload deployment to begin. And we'll listen back into mission control at that time. But we're answering your questions. You can send those in the chat by tagging us at the launch pad, and we'll work on answering those. Corner page, we can gift it to Australia like we did Skylab. Let's try not to do that again. that took a little while to get them to forgive. That one guy watching the first stage land will never get old. Absolutely. It's definitely an incredible sight to see. Catching up, making sure we don't miss anything. Ginger asking, what's the news regarding Good Luck Have Fun, the 3D printed rocket? Great question there, Ginger. Thanks for sending that in. So they're going to go for another launch attempt on Saturday. So we do have that stream scheduled for you guys. So we will do that live launch coverage and hopefully see the maiden flight of Terran 1 from Slick 16 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. At this time, they had some propellant conditioning things yesterday, and they kept delaying because of that. And then at the end, it sounds like they had an issue with temperature at one point with their propellant. It wasn't chilled enough. It was a little bit warmer than they wanted. And then ultimately, I don't believe we got a final say on what caused the actual abort, but they ended up just scrubbing for the day. They were out of time on their window, and they will go again on Saturday. Yes, catching up, making sure we're not missing anything. Absolutely, Athena. I've got the ISS on one of the shelves behind me here. I think it's on that side. For it, yeah, it's an awesome set. Really detailed, which is really nice. So definitely can check those out and keep a close eye on those because some of those sets are actually getting retired. They've been saying that for 2 years. 3 years on some of them, but they were meant to be limited editions. So I don't think we'll see those sets be around for many more years to come, especially once the station is retired. They'll become a unique piece. With that, we're going to take a really quick commentary break, but stay with us as we're just over 34 minutes away from deployment beginning, about 30 minutes from the second stage performing a second burn. Finalizing the orbit, there's a great view of the OneWeb satellites with the view of the Earth behind, and we will await deployment. But stay with us right here on the launch pad.
mission satellites for our customer OneWeb. Now, we've had a nominal mission so far. Falcon 9 launched on time at 2:13 p.m. Eastern Time from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral. And we did successfully recover that first stage back on landing zone 1. This marked the 13th landing for this booster, and the second stage did complete its first burn successfully. Now we're just about 20 seconds away from the second ignition of the MVAC engine, which will carry the second stage and the OneWeb Launch 17 payload into the orbit that we need to deploy the satellites. This burn is super short and should just last a few seconds here. So coming up in just about 6 seconds, let's listen in for that second burn. Looks like we did light that second engine. We're just waiting on confirmation of...
Nominal orbit insertion.
There it is, just had confirmation of nominal orbital insertion. So great news there. The satellites are now in an orbit that is ready for deployment. So that short burn we just completed is actually meant to refine the orbital trajectory that the vehicle is following in space. And because at this point in the flight, the stage is completely above the atmosphere and mostly empty of propellant, it really doesn't take that much to get it moving. And so that's why that burn was so short. And as a reminder, the OneWeb Launch 17 mission payload is still attached to the Falcon 9's second stage. And coming up next, we have the first of 3 planned deployment sequences for the 40 total OneWeb satellites. The first set of deployments will deploy 14 satellites and is scheduled to occur in just about 2 minutes from now. And as a reminder, we may lose ground station coverage for at least 4 of the satellite deployments in this sequence. And if we do, the teams in the control room will likely confirm successful deployment when we reach our next ground station as we orbit the Earth. Now, after completing that second MVAC burn, we are in a circular orbit about 600 kilometers above the Earth's surface, traveling about 27,000 kilometers per hour or 17,000 miles per hour. Earlier in the mission, you might have noticed that large MVAC nozzle glowing during burn 1. Now, this actually happens because the nozzle converts some of the heat of the engine's exhaust into visible light. And this is just one of the many methods that a rocket engine can use to deal with extreme heat. As you can imagine, the exhaust from the MVAC is incredibly hot. If you're just joining us, welcome to our webcast for the OneWeb Launch 17 mission. So far, we have had a nominal mission with liftoff at 2:13 p.m. Eastern Time from Space Launch Complex 40 in Florida. We had a successful recovery of the first stage for the 13th time on this booster, and so far, Stage 2 has completed 2 burns. And in just about 20 seconds or so, we should be coming up on the beginning of the first payload deployment sequence. As a reminder, OneWeb is a connectivity wholesaler that provides connectivity solutions at scale in pursuit of bridging the digital divide around the world. Today's mission marks OneWeb's 17th overall launch, and it will bring their LEO constellation to 582 satellites in space. Now, it's just about 20 seconds until the first set of satellites begin to deploy. Let's listen into the nets and keep our eyes open.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 1 and Alpha 5, separation confirmed.
And there we go, confirmation of successful deployment of OneWeb Sat A1 and A5. Looks like we did get some live video coverage of that.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 4 and Alpha 8, separation confirmed.
Good news there, we did just separate another 2 OneWeb satellites, A4 and A8. Our next payload deploy should be coming up in just about 45 seconds or so. So far, we have deployed 4 out of the total 40 OneWeb satellites. And as a reminder, we have 14 total deployments in this particular sequence, so that leaves us 10 more satellites to deploy. And also, just as a reminder, the last 4 satellites may happen in the blackout period where we do not have ground station coverage, but we will confirm successful deployment of those on our next connection to a ground station.
OneWeb, Sat Bravo 1 and Bravo 5, separation confirmed.
There we go. 2 more OneWeb satellites, B1 and B5, have been separated. Getting some really cool views here of these payloads as they float off into space.
OneWeb, Sat Charlie 1 and Charlie 5, separation confirmed.
There go the next 2, C1 and C5, have successfully deployed. Should be another 20 seconds or so until the next payload deploy.
OneWeb, Sat Alpha 2 and Alpha 6, separation confirmed.
There we go. 2 more satellites deployed there. Got a great shot of those satellites floating off into space. A2 and A6 have successfully deployed. So our next set of satellites should be deployed in just about a minute or so, but the next 2 deployments are expected to be in an area of blackout, so we may not get coverage of them in this particular sequence. So far in this sequence, we have successfully deployed 10 out of the 14 satellites, and so just waiting on those next 4, but we may not get confirmation of those last 4 until a little bit later in the mission.
OneWeb, Sat Bravo 4 and Bravo 8, separation confirmed.
Looks like we did actually have coverage of OneWeb satellites B4 and B8 deployments. So that leaves just 1 more set of satellites to be deployed in this sequence. So far, we have deployed successfully 12 out of the 14 OneWeb satellites currently planned for this deployment sequence. Looks like we have just about another minute before we deploy that last pair of satellites for this particular sequence. On your screen is a live view of the payload adapter. It's at the very top of the second stage. You can see those OneWeb satellites attached all throughout it. And that glowing dot off in the background is actually one of the previous satellites that we just deployed in this sequence. Should be deploying that last pair of satellites in about 30 seconds, but we may lose ground station coverage.
Expected loss of signal molded.
And as expected, we did get LOS, or loss of signal, before we were able to confirm successful deployment of the last 2 satellites in this deployment sequence. We were able to confirm deployment of 12 of 14 of those satellites in this group. And as I mentioned earlier, we should be able to confirm successful deployment of the other 2 satellites when we reach the next ground station. Now, our second deployment sequence is scheduled to start around T+1 hour and 14 minutes, but we likely won't have ground station coverage until about 3 minutes after that. So as I mentioned earlier, if we are able to regain ground station coverage earlier than we expect, we'll be sure to provide live views, so stay tuned for that. But for now, we'll plan to come back to you live around the T+1 hour and 17-minute mark, so sit back and enjoy the space views.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. We were following along there with the first batch of payload deployment of OneWeb 17. As I said there, we got about 12 minutes till the second round of deployments gets underway. We'll be staying live through all of this. Darmok, thank you again. Another group of gifted memberships. Really do appreciate that. If it's your first time here, though, welcome here at the launch pad. It's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow because we believe that space is better together. We're glad to have you joining us here. While we've been running this stream, we just also had the state of NASA. Administrator Bill Nelson announcing the 2024 fiscal budget, but an even bigger announcement that Artemis 2's crew will be announced on April 3rd. And of course, you can catch that all live right here on the launch pad. We just dropped our article about it. We want to know, who do you think is going to be selected? Who would you select for your Artemis 2 crew? Let us know on social media with the hashtag MyArtemisCrew. But exciting times as our Artemis 2 countdown to launch coverage seems to be getting kicked off even sooner, and we can't wait because it means we are finally going back to the moon with crew. But we got about 10 more minutes till the next batch of OneWeb satellites gets deployed, so stay with us right here on the launch pad.
14 mission webcasts. So far, we've had a nominal mission with an on-time liftoff, first stage landing, 2 second stage burns, and successful deployment confirmation from 12 OneWeb satellites. We did have LOS just before the last 2 deployments in the first deployment sequence, so we are still waiting for confirmation on those. During this blackout period, we also should have started our second payload deployment sequence around the T+1 hour and 14-minute mark. Once we regain connection to our second stage shortly, our operators on console should be able to confirm the satellites that deployed during the blackout period, and we should be able to bring you live views of the rest of the satellites set to deploy in this sequence.
Acquisition of signal, Svalbard.
9, OneWeb satellite separations confirmed.
There you just heard confirmation of 9 satellite deployments confirmed. So that includes the 2 satellites from the first set of deployments.
OneWeb sat Delta 4 and Delta 8 separation confirmed.
There you had confirmation of another 2 satellites deployed. So we did get confirmation of the 2 satellites from the last deployment sequence, as well as 9 deployments from this sequence, including the one we just called out. We have 4 more satellites in this deployment sequence of 13 satellites, with the next set deploying in just about 20 seconds.
OneWeb sat Delta 3 and Delta 7 separation confirmed.
Great news, you see Delta 3 and Delta 7 satellites have successfully deployed. Final 2 satellites in this deployment sequence in just about 10 seconds here.
OneWeb sat Charlie 2 and Charlie 6 separation confirmed.
Great confirmation of satellites C2 and C6. And those are the last 2 satellites of this second deployment sequence. With those last 2 satellites, that confirms successful deployment of all 13 satellites in this second deployment. And so far, we have successfully deployed 27 of 40 total satellites on today's mission. Our third and final payload deployment sequence should begin around the T+1 hour and 29-minute mark, but we likely won't have ground station coverage until 3 minutes after the third deployment sequence begins. Now again, if we're able to connect to a different ground station earlier, we'll be sure to bring you real-time views of deployment, but we'll see you again in a few minutes.
And if you're just joining us, welcome here to the launch pad. You can see there the final OneWeb satellite being deployed from the second stage of SpaceX's Falcon 9. OneWeb 17 officially complete. Let's listen in.
Customer OneWeb for entrusting us with today's mission. We also want to give a shout out to the Range and Federal Aviation Administration for supporting today's launch. Today's launch includes our 215th overall SpaceX mission to date and 16th launch of the year. And to all of our viewers, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.
And with that, we are complete. If you haven't yet, take a moment, engage that subscribe button so you never miss another live launch coverage, docking, undocking, or return to Earth. But that's going to do it for us here today. Here at TLP, it's our mission to inform and inspire the explorers of tomorrow, because we believe that space is better together, and we were glad to have you joining us here today. But for now, from TLP HQ, my name's Zach. This was our live launch coverage of SpaceX OneWeb 17, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.